Hello, my name's Ruth Childs. Some of you may have seen my previous videos, or others may know me from the very successful work that I do with curing focal dystonia. So if you've watched my previous videos, you'll know that I'm very excited at the moment because my book on how to cure focal dystonia is going to be released at the end of March of this year, 2022. In today's video, I want to describe what I talk about in part 2 of the book. So just to remind you, part 1 is about the physiological changes that happen in your brain that are to do with the survival part of the brain and how that puts your body into primordial survival movements, which are exactly the same as the dystonic movements. In part 2, I talk about more detail about, well, why has that happened to you? I think this is important because if you have access to those memories, that can really accelerate your recovery and the curing of this. But and even if you can't remember it, it doesn't matter. But it's actually, I think, very helpful to recognise where it comes from. It gives us a context that really does help in our process of curing the focal dystonia. So I talk about adverse events. That's where it comes from. I'm very specific with this term because it includes many different aspects that we might misunderstand if we used any other term. I talk about adverse events in general, but there are some very, very specific adverse events that I talk about in detail. One of those is early attachment breaks and lack of infant attunement, which then often leads to the trigger for the focal dystonia coming on as being another loss. Loss of a relationship breakup, loss of a loved one. I also talk about having been educated or learning music within the oppression learning model, and describe that very, very specifically. And I mean, if we wanted to give it very brief summary or overview, it would be about using the neocortex to learn things that only the subcortex can learn and really control. But I go into much more detail about what that is. Many of us, our musical training has been like that, as well as much of our other education. Then the third group that I include, as well as just the general adverse events which I talk about, are injuries or accidents to the body, because the body also can sometimes really install that as a survival mode. So that's the third part of the book. I talk about that in a lot of detail so that you can really understand that within yourself. And you can understand what the survival mode feels like and really be able to recognise it. And then just to remind you that the third part of the book then is very practical neuroplastic exercises based on brain spotting that will actually enable you to resolve those changes in your brain and bring your brain back to complete normal functioning, and therefore your body back to complete normal functioning. So I'm so excited, and I've really written this book with a lot of love to really serve you. So thank you so much for listening today.